My name is Kristi Faltorusso. I am the Vice President of Customer Success at ClientSuccess. And for today's bootcamp series, we're going to talk about customer offboarding and exit interviews and how to end on a high note. I'll give you a little bit of my story and why this became part of this series and why this is so important. But we're really excited to jump right in. And so we will go ahead and do that. So first, why is it important to invest in customer offboarding and exit interviews? I'm going to give you a little bit of a story. I think stories resonate. People like a story, right? So hopefully this will make it feel real for you. Several years back, I was at a company. Don't try to map it out on my LinkedIn profile where I was. But I was at a company where almost always when a customer would notify us of their non-intention to continue the relationship, our company culture was such that we shut down, right? We took it so personal. Like it was a personal attack on our people, on our processes, on our product. And we almost just kind of left them hanging in the wind until their last day of their subscription would almost cut them out. And it was just a horrible experience. At the point I was a senior customer success manager, and then moved into leadership roles. And that motion just continued. And I always thought, wow, what a horrible way to end the partnership, right? That's the last thing that they're going to remember. And we could have optimized that, right? We could have made it a better experience. We could have used it as a moment to learn, to reflect, to collect feedback. And we just never did. And so as I progressed in my leadership career, I tried to make a point of doing better by our customers, right? Whether their decision was to continue with us for years and years or to part ways, right? Wouldn't it be better to part ways as friends? And so I decided to redesign what this would look like for all of our customers. And so, for me, it's important for several reasons. And I'll kind of share some of that with you in case you don't have buy-in to optimize this stage in your journey. Hopefully these are a few points that will help resonate with a business. So it's important to think about what happens when a customer leaves, right? And they're going to go off on their journey, and perhaps maybe they're moving to a competitive solution. Maybe they're building their own product. Perhaps they're consolidating their tools. Maybe they've eliminated the team and the need for this, right? Maybe the pain just isn't there any longer. Whatever the reason is, though, you have to think about your customers and what's going to happen in the future. And so the first thing I always think about is your customers in the future could be referrals, right? They can refer business to you. If a customer leaves because your solution didn't meet their specific needs, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't meet the needs of others in their network, right? Their peers, their colleagues, or perhaps they end up at another organization where the product is a better fit, right? If you've delivered a lasting positive experience, they're going to be a referral for you, right? Even if it wasn't right for them, it would be right for somebody else, and it's going to be a positive one. The second thing to consider is second order revenue. And this is to suggest that your customer, they go off, perhaps they move to another company, right? And they bring your solution on board. Or, they decide to repurchase again in the future, right? It wasn't a fit in that moment, but maybe they didn't have the resources or the funding. In the future, they do, right? So it's important to consider the impact of that second order revenue, right? Getting that individual to repurchase and rebuy and bring you back into the fold. The next is the employees, right? I think this is an interesting one and probably not one that's ever really considered. But if you're an organization that focuses on hiring subject matter experts, think about that, right? Your end users, if they've had a positive experience with your brand, with your product, they could become employees of yours. In fact, I myself, even at ClientSuccess, have hired folks on board who had been previous customers of ClientSuccess. And because they were successful with the solution and they had a positive experience, they came on board to basically advocate and evangelize their success with the customers that they supported, right? So they could be your future employees. The next is your think about your POC or your exec sponsor, right? These folks can go and they could be that individual at another organization, and where their journey leads could roads pointing back to you, right? How many folks end up at new jobs, new organizations where maybe your solution is already in place? And think about the impact if they join and they have had such a negative experience, and they now come into a position of power and authority and decision making and say, you know what, we're going to rip this out because we've had a really poor experience. I didn't trust them. It left a bad taste in my mouth, right? So think about the risk, even with your existing business, if somebody goes into one of your existing customers. And the last point is references, right? How many times are we looking for folks to be a reference? And even if your customer is no longer a customer, right, they could still be an advocate for you and for your business and your brand. And so it's important to consider all 5 of these factors. In fact, these are things that we've now kind of, I think, beaten is not a good reference, right? We now really talk about this a lot here at Client Success, right? It's the future potential of all the folks that you work with, right? And word of mouth spreads like wildfire. And so if you can leave a lasting positive impression on somebody, that's what they'll remember, right? That's what they'll take with them. And they might not remember every single thing that went wrong, but they will remember how you made them feel. Now, in my team meeting this morning, also another story, I was talking to the team about today's boot camp, and I always encourage my team to attend and to participate because I think it's really good for them from a learning standpoint. Also, not only for them as individuals, but to work with their customers, right? And to know what message we're delivering as a business. And one of the folks in my team said that HubSpot actually has an internal kind of cultural philosophy around holding the door open for their customers, right? So somebody might leave, but they try to make sure that experience is a really positive one. And, they consider this holding the door open for your customers, right? Like, are you going to welcome them back? Is this a place that they'd want to come back? And I just really loved that. I loved everything about what that said, and it really resonated with me. And so I really loved this statement and philosophy. And I even said, great, you know what? I'm going to include this in our deck for today's boot camp. And I'm going to think about how we can hold the door open for our customers here at Client Success. So I just really loved this. I thought it was really powerful. And I think it even gave me like a visual, like of somebody holding the door, right? And that's always like a positive experience, right? Have you ever had the door slammed in your face? It's not a good one. So this I thought was a great philosophy and one that hopefully we can all embrace. So I have to include this quote, and it kind of dovetails off of what I just said, right? That people will remember how you made them feel. Well, Maya Angelou had this quote, and I'm sure many of you have seen it, heard it, but not only do I think it's really applicable to this topic in particular, but to customer success as a whole, right? And so just to quote her, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Right. And we talk about customer success being all about relationship management and building and fostering trust. And how can you do that, right? If you're not being very cognizant of the experiences that you create for your customers, right? How you make them feel. And so I just thought this was super powerful. And it made me stop and think about like, wow, okay, if we applied this quote, right, or this philosophy to every interaction, every engagement we had with a customer, how our customers would all benefit from that, right? How did you make them feel? At the end of the day, I don't always have the best news, right? I think I had a post about this a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about being the bearer of bad news, right? And so oftentimes we're in this position of having to deliver bad news, right? Maybe the product roadmap has changed and we're not going to build that cool product that they wanted, or, maybe something about their contract, right? Maybe they tried to get out of their contract earlier and they're looking for an early out, whatever the case may be. I don't always have the answer that they want to hear, but how I handle that makes a big difference, right? And so going back to that customer experience and that empathetic ear and heart and leading that way, I thought this was a great example of how we can all think about what we do, what we say, but more importantly, the impact of those words and those actions on our customers. All right, so we're going to get into the good stuff now. I promise I'm going to make this all really actionable for you, as we always do. But let's just be real about something, right? Customers renew and grow with you when they achieve their goals and they have a good and consistent experience. I know there's a million reasons why people say your customer churned but the reality is your customers wouldn't be looking for those opportunities to leave if you didn't give them a reason to, right? So I always say the reasons are really typically tied back to maybe it's state of the business, but really focus on value and experience. And if you can help your customers achieve their goals and create a good and consistent experience. And you'll see here, I don't say perfect. I don't say, anything magnificent here. Good, right? It's good and consistent, right? People can rely on the experience that you're delivering. It's consistent throughout their journey. And so consistency is big for me. So I always say, listen, your customers, they're going to stay if you can do these things. If you can do them well, and you can do them consistently throughout the journey. But with that said, there are reasons why customers leave, or I would say like the result of those things may attribute your customers to doing other things, right? So if they haven't had a good experience, you haven't given them what they needed, and they haven't seen value, your customers might leave and claim some of these things, right? So I kind of break them down into two buckets, avoidable and unavoidable. And trust me, there are probably, if you wanted to get into like the nuances and break these things down, you could probably unpack all of these reasons into a multitude of things. But the way that I think about them is the first being in the avoidable, right? Product gaps. And this isn't like you didn't deliver on a feature or a function that they really were excited about. This is, your product is prohibitive, right? Your product doesn't enable them to do the work that they need to do in order to achieve their outcome. So I think it's important to distinguish the two, because people are always going to want your product to do something else. And it's, I mean, I use tools every day and I'm like, wow, I wish it really did this one more thing. That doesn't mean I'm going to leave because it doesn't do that thing. It means I would benefit immensely if it did. Now, on the flip side of that is the product is prohibitive, right? What I purchased it for, it doesn't support. And so listen, that could happen because of misalignment in the sales process. It could also happen post initial sale where, you know, the customer's journey has evolved, their needs have changed. And so all those things are considerations. So think about that from a product gap standpoint. The next is competitive, right? Your customers don't sign a contract and say, oh my gosh, I can't wait in a couple months to go evaluate another solution and move and undo all of the work that we've done for this past year and go do it all over again, right? So that's just really important to think about that, right? Your customers aren't choosing to go to competitors. They feel like they don't have an alternative, right? You have not been able to help them achieve the two things that they set out for, right? That value and that experience. You haven't delivered on those things, so much so they feel like their arm is twisted and they must go. And so that's what I think about competitive. Now, of course, you can always have a champion of a solution come into the organization and say, you know what? I've used this, we're going to use this. It could be, you know, your company was acquired and the parent company is using an alternative solution. So yes, we're going to say, we want to standardize our tools. You might have an investor come and you might raise a round and those investors might say, hey, we have everyone in our portfolio use this solution. Those are different. Those I think of more as like state of the business and kind of M&A. So those are more unavoidable, but the competitive is, again, you just haven't been able to deliver for your customers. So they need to go and evaluate something else. The next is access to leadership. I hear this all the time, right? You just didn't get access to the right people to foster those relationships. And as a result, they decide to not continue the partnership. Again, this is not a reason. This is something that happened in the partnership that didn't help your situation, but it's not necessarily a reason. But oftentimes, if you don't have buy-in and you don't have support across the organization, this can be a contributing factor to that. Customer fit, right? Nobody ever in their career has ever had a poor fit customer, especially if you're an early stage company, early stage company, you might be selling to just anyone who wants to buy your product. And those customers come along and they want to influence the roadmap and they want to be part of your journey. And that's all really exciting. But those customers might not be the ICP that you eventually identify, or you've got sales teams that are just incentivized incorrectly and are selling to anybody and not really assessing whether or not it addresses the pains and needs of your customer. But customer's not a fit. And that happens, right? It's not the end of the world, but listen, sometimes you part ways as friends and it just wasn't a fit. You didn't meet the needs. You're not the profile of the customers who really get value out of our solution. And that happens. And sometimes it's from the start. And sometimes those customers evolve into those poor fit customers, right? They have had so many changes. Perhaps they outgrow you and your ability to serve and support them. So it's just important to think about that, right? It doesn't mean that because they're poor fit and they leave, that they were always a poor fit. It could have been an evolution of change in their organization, their dynamics. But either way, sometimes not every product is a fit for every customer, right? I always say that you can't be everything to everybody. Failure to launch. We've all talked about the importance of onboarding, right? And getting your customers properly configured, right? Their platform set up in a way that is aligned with their goals and what it is that they're trying to achieve. There's also this inability to train and enable them. One of the things that I ask as part of the end of my onboarding is, have we properly trained and enabled you to independently use our solution, right? And I ask that very specific question because at the end of the day, we are a SaaS platform, right? And many of you probably are as well. And the goal there is to have your customers use your technology, not you use it on behalf of your customers. Unless you're a services organization or have, some professional services packages that you're selling, in which case, yes, absolutely. But for most of us, we don't have a model that supports us doing the work for our customers. So we've got to get them to a place where they can do the work themselves, and we're here to help and guide them. The last is price. I've heard people talk about this all the time, right? Your product's too expensive, or it's we found a cheaper alternative, but that usually is tied to value, right? Because I'll tell you, I spend a lot of money on a lot of things because I see the value in them, right? Or there's things that I like. And so when customers are making that investment, they will make it if they're getting that ROI back, right? If they see the value in the output. So I don't like to say that price is a reason, right? It's something that they might be looking to leverage or negotiate because they haven't gotten what they needed out of the partnership. Now, in terms of unavoidable, it could be business need. During the pandemic, right, we saw a lot of companies move away from customer success teams. Not all, but I definitely saw a bunch where they said, you know what, we're going to have our sales team manage our customer success. We're going to get rid of our customer success team. The business needs shifted, right? And I'm sure there's a ton of examples of where the evolution of a company and the changes and the dynamics there impact partnerships. And sometimes those are outside of your control. State of the business, right? The company goes under, something else really impactful happens in their organization, but for whatever reason, the state of the business is not viable, right? They can't maintain the partnership. Again, I hate to use the pandemic as a multiple example here, but how many of these companies were really struggling, right, to maintain their business and keep things afloat? And because of the state of the business, they weren't able to keep a lot of vendors and solutions in place like they wanted to. M&A is a big one. Depending on the markets that you serve, for us here at ClientSuccess, M&A is really impactful. We work with a lot of mid-sized, emerging, growing companies who are prime for M&A. And so I almost like I use the analogy of like a Pac-Man, right? Like our customers, and then there's these big companies go and eat them up because they're delicious, but they're profitable. They're great businesses. They're solving real problems, and they really integrate well into their portfolio. So M&A is tough. I always talk about M&A. It could be a positive, it could be a negative, depending how you manage it. But for a lot of companies, right, M&A is going to be tough to navigate, especially if your company is the one being acquired or merged, because often you'll have another entity who's going to say, you know what, we're going to standardize our tech stack. We want to all use the same solution. We're deprecating this entire team. Therefore, there's not a need for the solution, right? A lot of things happen because a lot of change takes place during a merger or acquisition. So this is another instance of where it is tough to control. And the last one I always talk about is investing. And people are like, wait, investment? That seems like a good thing. It depends, right? There's a lot of portfolio companies that might be investing in competitive solutions or alternative solutions. Maybe they want everyone in their portfolio to standardize what they use across the board. So I think investing is an interesting one. I won't say it's always negative, but definitely when it does come up, it's interesting, and you should go explore and unpack that because it could be risks that you haven't kind of accounted for. So why am I walking you through all of these? Because today's session is not about why customers churn, but rather what to do when they do. So what I want to talk about is, okay, so now you know your customer has expressed their intent to not continue the partnership. And that's how I like to phrase it, right? It's their intention to continue or not to continue, because usually you're having conversations before everything is dead, and they're expressing what their future intentions are. So the first thing that I instruct my team to do is propose a safe plan, right? We try to manage our customer renewal process 120 days out, definitely within 120 and 90 at the very latest, with the idea here of just understanding our customers' intentions and any risk so that we have time to get ahead of it. If you're running your renewal play and you're not having conversations, or you're not highly engaged with your customers and risk is not evident, and you're having these conversations 30 days out, you're not going to be able to do anything about it, right? So I try to leave some time for us to intervene appropriately and provide alternative recommendations to help our customers. So always start with proposing a plan, right? I always ask my customers, I'm always grateful for their transparency. I hate having these conversations, but I want to know very clearly, is there anything we can do to preserve the partnership? And I will tell you, a lot of times I'll have customers really lean into that question and say, yes, absolutely. We would like better service. We need help with our configuration. My team needs to be trained. They're not using it. My executive leadership team isn't seeing the value. Whatever the case may be, sometimes you're blessed with a customer who is going to be transparent. They're going to be open, and they're going to explore the opportunity to preserve that partnership. And so you need to, as a customer success professional, be ready to devise a plan with that customer on what your path forward might look like. Now, sometimes there isn't a path forward, and that happens too. And that is okay. It's inevitable. Everyone will lose a customer from time to time. And so the next thing that I do is I want to make sure that we're establishing timelines. Depending on when the communication to us is made on whether or not the customer intends to continue the partnership or not, I try to figure out, okay, well, what does our timeline look like? Now, hopefully, if we've gotten ahead of it early enough, we try to save it. If we can't, then we're very honest about, okay, let's talk about what the management of this looks like. And we work to establish that timeline. Now, this is where we introduce this concept of offboarding, right? So it might be that, okay, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, thank you so much. Listen, you have got, 3 months left in your contract. Let's talk about what this is going to look like. And so here we're going to talk about introducing that concept of offboarding. We're going to introduce all the timelines and dates. So your renewal date, any auto renew dates, any other important timeline dates or things that we have to manage together, as well as how we're going to engage with them over that period of time. And I'll talk to you guys about what engagement looks like with a customer who's expressed their intention to not continue. There should still be engagement. I'll get to that momentarily. The third thing is scheduling the offboarding, right? So this is going to look like things. I mean, this is like the internal meat and potatoes. Think about that, right? So you're going to have to deprecate their instance or their tenant. You have to make sure that data is being deleted. You're going to terminate access, right? So sometimes there's a sequencing act to some of these things. Whatever your internal process looks like, this is where you're going to need to make sure that all of this is in place so it happens at the appropriate times. Now, remember, if your customer is in a subscription for another 3 months, it's not wise to go and turn off anything before their end date. So I will just call that out because I've seen and heard some things that are questionable, but if they've paid through the end of the year, technically they're still in that partnership. Please don't turn off or delete or, deprecate anything. But make sure that you're working to make sure that those things do happen when they're supposed to. The fourth thing is all about customer communication, right? So we like to schedule conversations with our customers throughout that life cycle of offboarding, right? And talk to them about, helping them get access to their data, talking about like, if they are moving to an alternative solution, how do we ensure things are being exported in a format that they can go and import into an alternative solution or store or save or integrate into a BI tool or something, right? We want to just make sure that we're helping manage that process as well as all the communication, right? No surprises. That's kind of my mantra, is make sure that you and your customers are on the same page. Everyone knows what's happening and when it's happening. And the last big step for us is our exit interviews. This is a newer play for us here at ClientSuccess. I don't think it's something that we've done, I would say formally to the extent in which we are now doing it, but I have done this in a lot of other organizations where we've taken the time to reach out and actually learn from our customers. And during this, and we'll kind of walk through how I do this and how I orchestrate it and the types of questions I ask, but we make sure that this is all about us learning and growing. And so we don't ask the customer to repeat the things that they've been sharing with us for the past 3 months about why specifically they left, but we try to lean into questions, open-ended questions that will help us learn and grow as a business. So that is how we manage this process kind of from soup to nuts. And I will break this down into playbook format to give you some visibility onto how you might execute something like this. So this is an example of the playbook that I've created here at ClientSuccess and our 5 stages, right? So think about your stage 1 as you're being notified and your customer has said very clearly, we don't intend to continue the partnership, all the way through that end of that customer's subscription has come to an end and they're no longer a customer of yours. So the first is, we try to manage everything internally, right? So as soon as we've got communication from our customer, we want to make sure that we're kind of sounding the appropriate alarms, but making sure that anything tied to revenue is being forecasted, updated, and managed effectively. So in our system, we've got a tool called Pulse. We make sure that our Pulse is being updated. We talk about our subscriptions or the opportunities, if you're using something like Salesforce, that they're all updated to reflect that, right? So we want to change our probabilities, change the stage, make sure that everywhere that you document risk is being properly updated. So that way, everyone who needs to have visibility, they have that. In addition, we make sure that we are making and notifying all the teams aware who are core stakeholders in that partnership so that everyone's on the same page, right? Nothing worse than, marketing reaching out to your customer to do a case study when they've already expressed their intention not to continue the partnership, right? So you got to make sure everyone is in the know. The second thing for us is confirmation. So this is walking through with our customers, confirmation of all their details, right? We talk about what offboarding looks like, how we're going to manage that, what are the steps that we take, how we like to partner with our customers. Now, again, all of this is through the lens of what we hope to do with them. Our customers might very well have a different plan, right? And that's okay as well. In fact, there might be a situation where your customers already offboarded themselves off of your product and they don't want to engage with you and there's nothing left for them to do. They got what they needed and they're on their way waiting for the subscription to end. That's a possibility. But I want that to be the outcome my customers tell me that they want to follow, not one that I'm driving, right? So if we do this, we want to manage all this effectively. So the third bucket or stage for us in our playbook is about engagement. Now, if our customer lets us know 3-4 months, remember I start the renewal process at 120. So at 4 months from the renewal, if my customer expresses their non-intention to renew, what do I do for 4 months, right? I don't want to leave my customer in the dust and ignore them, right? I want to make sure that they know that they still have a resource, an ally, and somebody here to support them in whatever way, shape, or form that they need. So we make sure that we let our customers know what our modified engagement model might look like during that period of time. And it might be if you're supporting a customer in a very high engagement model. So let's say you were talking weekly, there might not be a need for that, right? So we make a recommendation on what we believe the engagement should look like. And we ask for our customers to lean in and tell us if that's acceptable, if they want to increase or decrease that cadence. But we want to make ourselves available regardless of the intention so that we're still supporting them throughout the partnership, right? We're still doing what we said we were going to do. It's part of having access to the platform, right? Customer success is part of something that you give to your customers. So we don't stop that, right? We might modify it. The next stage for us is deprovisioning. So now let's just say we're getting to that final week, home stretch. Your customer, you've got to make sure that you're offboarding them effectively. And so this for us is, deletion of the account, turning off people's access. We delete data, right? We have to go check with finance, make sure all of the invoices are up to date. So there's a lot of steps that we have internally to manage this. And so we make sure that stage 4 for us is all about that effective management happening at the right times, right? Again, you don't want to do anything too early. You also don't want to leave things on for weeks and months and forget, oh, wait, I never turned that off and my customer is still using the platform and they're not paying for it. So managing this effectively is important. And the last stage for us is alignment. We as a company, me in particular as a leader, I'm very eager to listen and learn. I've only been with ClientSuccess for 6 months. So for me, I want to absorb as much as possible, right? I still have the ability to go and influence and build change into my business. And the best way for me to figure out where to start and what to focus on is the feedback that comes directly from my customers or the folks that have decided to no longer be. So we're really big now on conducting these interviews in a way that will help us learn and grow in a different way. This isn't about why the product didn't do this 3 things and they felt very strongly that it needs to do. It's not that conversation. So I'm going to introduce you into some of the questions that I asked, and I'll give you examples of those. But we have found that the learning is coming out of this conversation because you're done with the partnership, right? There's no pressure. There's no expectations. It's like a listen and learn. And our customers seem to be very open and very transparent, and they're rooting for us, right? We weren't a fit for them for whatever reason. This didn't work, but there is still stuff that we can do and we can influence that change. So I'm always really big on having those conversations. So those are the stages that we execute. To give you some example, just like what I've outlined for you, this is a sample of how our playbook is configured for us at ClientSuccess. So you'll see here, I've got my 5 stages, just as I've outlined for you, right? Intention to not renew has been communicated. We've got customer communication. We've got our engagement steps, deprovisioning of the account, and then aligning through our exit interviews. So breaking that down a little bit, you just get a little sample here. The numbers next to these indicate how many tasks and activities reside within those. So if you think about these colored elements here, those are the stages. Then these are some of the tasks, the activities rather, and then there's tasks that live in this, right? So after the customer has expressed that intention to renew, we've got 3 tasks that we have our team go in and kind of run and execute against. And so I'm sharing this as an example of whether or not you're using a platform like ClientSuccess, an alternative platform, or you just want to build out a framework of how to manage this. You could do this in Excel. And so basically just have a list of the things that you need and want and expect your team to do to effectively manage this process. So for us, like I said, we build it out into what we call our success cycles. And this ensures that all the steps are done at the right time. They're completed, right? We don't have to worry about customers that remain having access to the solution for months and months on end. So making sure that you manage all those steps effectively is critical. So why are exit interviews important? So I think about these as like an opportunity to promote growth. And so whether that's growth for your people, your process, your technology, right? However you want to use that. But the first thing I think about is your people and your process, right? So I've learned a ton about things that we didn't do, expectations we didn't meet, processes that didn't work. They felt disjointed, disconnected, wrong time, wrong execution. So leaning into understanding how can we improve the things that are within our control? And I think about that as through the lens of people and process, right? Did we have the right skills of the team in place, right? Did they know our product? Did they know our customer base? Were they able to lean in a very consultative way? Did they proactively do the things that we wanted them to do, right? So I learn a lot by understanding what worked and didn't work for each individual customer. And so this helps us enhance our people and our process. So maybe this is a moment for coaching for some of my folks in my team. Perhaps it's, you know what, we've got to go throw this process out the window. I mean, we're in the process of redesigning onboarding because I got a lot of feedback from customers, right? That felt like it didn't meet their expectations. So you listen and you take that feedback internally so that way you can promote growth. The second thing is increase long-term net and logo retention. I mean, who doesn't want that? If you can find out why your customers are leaving, you can do something about it. And so, you know, think about that. If you're able to address thematic issues that might be preventing your customers from getting value out of this, the partnership, being able to lean in a way to go address that is only going to help more customers stay long-term and obviously give you the ability to grow those customers, which would definitely positively impact your net revenue retention. And the third one here is that obvious one, right, is feeding the product roadmap and functionality. So perhaps the product just didn't meet the use cases of a particular business. Now, I'm sure throughout that entire kind of offboarding process, you learned a lot about your customer's specific needs. This often will lean in to give you different views and different visibility about like what excited your customers, what they'll miss, but also what are some things that were real sticking points for them. Even if it wasn't the driver of them leaving, what would they have expected to enhance their ability to adopt and use the solution? So thinking about this is a way to kind of feed that funnel of where your product is going to go into the future to meet the needs of organizations that look a certain way, that behave a certain way, right? So I'm very big on this and thinking about it through this lens of, you know, we're going to grow as people, we're going to grow our processes, we're going to grow our product. If we do all of these things, right, we're going to grow the business. So these are the reasons why I go and do that. If you needed reasons, these are some of those. So what does our exit interview process look like? So the first thing we do is we figure out who's going to run the interview. In full transparency, I have found that I've learned more and we've gotten more transparency when the CSP or the CSM or CSD, whatever you want to call them, didn't run it. Typically, I like to run those meetings, if not have Dave or somebody else in the organization, but having somebody who feels a little bit more neutral seems to get a little bit more transparency in my experience. Now, that might not be the case for you. Maybe your CSM and your customer have the strongest relationship in the world. Maybe they are their trusted advisor. They're leaving for other reasons, and they want to have that conversation with them. That's fine. But either way, you need to determine who's going to run the conversation. Obviously, the next one is got to get that on the calendar. Things to be aware of, right? I like to treat time as currency. I'm very big on that, right? Time is money. So I try to make sure that these interviews do not last longer than 30 minutes. If you've got a customer who's willing to share and divulge, maybe it's going to go a little bit longer, but let them be the driver of that, but don't ask for more than 30. And then also make sure that you're scheduling this meeting with the right person. I often see folks that are like, oh, you know, we need to get the executive stakeholder. If the executive stakeholder or the person who signed the contract, if they are so far removed from the partnership, right, maybe they're the signer, right? And so it seems like they're in a position of influence or power, which they may very well be from a signing standpoint. They may not be the best person to get that feedback from. So don't always assume that you need to go to the top to get the most valuable insights. So really figure out who the right person is. I don't know what level they're going to be at, but find the right person to have that conversation with. Next thing I'm going to say is prepare for that conversation. You can't go into that conversation not knowing about anything and everything that's transpired with that customer, right? Just like when you're onboarding a customer, you ensure that you have a proper handoff, right, with a salesperson to make sure that you understand why they're buying, what their use cases are. The same thing is for the exit interview. You need to make sure that the customer is very clear that you know what happened, what's transpired over the past couple months or the years, whatever, why they're leaving. And so you're not here to have that conversation. Instead, you're here to use this as an opportunity to learn and get better. And so I like to be very prepared for those discussions. I don't want them to repeat anything that they've repeated. I'm looking for an opportunity to go a bit deeper. So make sure that you're investing the time to do your due diligence before you come into that conversation. It will change the dynamic of the dialogue. The last thing is execute with gratitude. Remember, at this point, this person is probably no longer your customer. And so they're doing this out of the kindness of their heart, right? They want to share this feedback with you in hopes that you'll get better, you'll do something with it. So make sure that even as you're having this, you're leading it with gratitude. And that's why I say execute with gratitude, because you need to be very appreciative of the fact that what they're giving you is worth its weight in gold. right? They're going to tell you all the things that you need to know and need to learn so that way you can go take action on it and evolve and better yourself as a business. So really important to just make sure that you're gracious, you're appreciative of that feedback. I always say, like, be open-minded, open-hearted. And then I like to, if it's possible, if you have the budget, I don't always, reward them with a token of your appreciation. I never say, hey, give us, like, let's schedule this meeting. So, and I'm going to give you a gift card. No, I always say, like, let's have this meeting and here's our intention. And hopefully that's something you'll be willing to participate in. If they do, great. Like, can I send them a $10 Starbucks gift card, or can I just show them with a small token of my appreciation? You don't have to. It's just a cherry on top. But I do like to think, again, if time is currency, how do I pay them back for what they've just given me? So this is how we structure this, and is how we think about it as we execute. And so just to give you some insight into the types of questions we ask, I try not to ask anything that's too specific about why they left. I know why they left. We've been talking about why they were leaving for the past, I don't know, 120, 90, 60 days. So I know why they're leaving. Instead, I want to learn. Right. And so this isn't about confirmation of why they're leaving. This is more about, what can I take away from this so we can get better? So when I think about the people, and I line my questions so that I can evolve against the three things that I kind of talked about earlier. But I ask them to describe their engagement with our teams. I want to hear it through their words, right? I don't want to put words in their mouth. I don't want to say, like, did we meet? Like, no, yes or no, all open-ended, but describe your engagement, right? How instrumental were we in helping you drive value from the partnership? I want to know, like, did we bring things to the table? Did we help facilitate that? Like, any success you had? How would you describe interactions with our support team? Support, we know, has a huge impact on experience and output and value. And maybe it's not support. Maybe you care about professional services. Maybe you care about onboarding, but there's other parts of your organization that you want to lean into. This would be a great opportunity to ask questions about that. What could we have done better to support you and the team? I'm a big fan of start, stop, continue. If you attended our webinar last week on account transitions, I talk about this, right? Like, as one of our slides with start, stop, continue. This kind of leans into that same kind of principle, right, of learning. So what could we have done better to support you and the team? What should our team stop doing right now, right? Like, what are we doing today that you feel like is just not working? We might disagree, and that's okay, but I want to hear what their standpoint, like, don't do these things anymore. From a process standpoint, describe your onboarding experience. Be thoughtful about this one. On the onboarding, if the customer has been with you for 5 years, maybe onboarding isn't what you want to double click into. For us, like, depending on when a customer leaves in their journey, I like to know this. So if it's after 1 year, if that's 2 years, I want to understand that a bit more, because it might help me understand kind of a failure to launch issue we have. How would you describe your experience doing business with us? This is going to be more broad. It's not just about doing, working with us, but, billing, invoicing, working with support, legal, procurement, marketing, right? It's about all of that. So your teams work with, your customers work with all different departments in your organization. This question is to understand, was it easy to work with us in all the interactions that you had along your journey? What were the biggest points of friction? I'm really big on this, right? Like, were there moments of failure that we had that were like, really, like, those, kind of contributing to the death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? What were the things that really went wrong that you felt like, oh God, this is so hard, it's making it so difficult? Those are things that I want to go and identify and fix. I asked, can you share with me, things that you felt we did exceptionally well? They shouldn't all be negative, right? We shouldn't also be under the assumption that everything we did was doom and gloom and bad and needs to be ripped out. But if we did things that were going well, what were those things? And then what process would you recommend I focus on enhancing for our customers? So this is, again, asking for their opinion on what they would want me to focus on. So again, if you look at the people in the process questions, you'll start to see very similarities. I'm asking different questions, but in the types of questions I'm asking, and to get certain feedback from them. And the last one's about product, right? So again, if you look at the first question across the board, describe your experience, describe your engagement. So this is, again, describe your experience using our platform, our product, right? What were the most challenging workflows for the team? So points of friction, again, but now specific to the product, not the process. I love this one. If you had a magic wand, what's one feature you would build or enhance? So what's the one driver of growth or success you think that we should focus on? What aspects of the platform will you miss? Right? Obviously, we couldn't be doing everything wrong. So hopefully there's something that when your customers are no longer customers, they think one day, oh man, I wish I still had that thing that did this thing because it was really helpful and making me do this other thing better. Right. So ask them what they would miss, right? This is how you start to figure out what are some of the customers' favorite parts of your platform. And then how do you build those up? And then I always ask, how would you describe your level of expertise in using our product? So this is an interesting one. Sometimes we have customers that just, again, it kind of goes back to that failure to launch, but they don't know what they don't know. And for some customers, they'll struggle through that and they think that they know everything they should or could know, but we've never leaned in to be more consultative. So I like this one because it helps me understand, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being an expert, where would you rate yourself in terms of our solution? And you'd be surprised. I get a lot of folks that are like 3, 4, and those are heartbreaking because, right, we could have done a better job to help them be a 7, and 8, 9, and 10. Right. So understanding their expertise could help you understand where you can enhance training, enablement, ease of use, ease of adoption, things of that nature, right? It could be in product. It could be, even from a people standpoint, right? And through your processes. So I like that one because it helps me learn a lot of different things about, the feedback we're getting. So these are sample questions. These are my questions. They don't need to be your questions. You can come up with your own, but I like them because they help me understand ways that we can influence change in our business. And so I recommend figuring out what are the questions that you want to design and craft. This is part of our workflow. So we basically have this as a document that our team can use when engaging with our customers in that exit interview process. We use this as kind of our guiding North Star, right? But we definitely put stars next to the questions that we want to hear or go into a bit more. We know that 30 minutes is not a long time to get through all of these. It might not be possible. We might say, from column 1, we want these 2, from column 2, we want these 2, column 3, right? So we pick the ones that we want to prioritize. And if we have time, we'll get to others, but there might be a couple that we know based on this customer, based on who they are, their experience, their tenure with us. These are the things we want to double click into. And these are going to be the most important findings for us in helping us, move forward. So like I said, figure out what's best, but have these prepared. This goes back to that preparation point I made earlier. You can't have this conversation and it won't be effective if you've not prepared for it. And that includes having the questions ready that you want to ask. Thinking about them is only going to detract you from actively listening, right? If you're trying to think about, oh, what's the next question I'm going to ask, or what do I want to hear? You're not going to be present in that moment. You're not going to hear really important things from that customer, even if you recorded it and you go back, right? Just make sure that you're actively listening. The best way to do that is to prepare and shut off all the other noise, sometimes the noise in your head, and focus on the conversation you're having. So the other thing that we haven't deployed yet, this is the other thing that I'm working on right now. So this is like a future project for me, kind of in the works. I want to deploy an end user survey. So once a customer is left, obviously I want to use the exit interview to have a strategic dialogue with them, learn more, ask questions, right, probe a bit. But I also want to hear feedback from the folks that were frontline using our product. And so what we want to do is create an end user survey that would allow us to get feedback from folks that used our platform in the day-to-day, right? They might not have been the decision makers. Maybe they were influencers in that decision to keep us or remove us. But I want to get more feedback, not just from the core teams we worked with, but from the broader partnership. So things that I'm focused on when I'm building this out is, one, I want to keep those questions broad. Our end users could be various people, right? It could be somebody from the ops team. It could be end users who, for us, it would be customer success managers. It could be people it could be their Salesforce admin, right? So I want to make sure that all the questions are broad enough and applicable enough that anybody who this is going to, they're relevant. So keeping them broad. Determining the best format. So we're also playing with the idea that, do we want short answer, right? Where it's more fill in the blank. Do we want things that are on a scale? Do we want to have like a star rating? So we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the best format for us to capture information that's going to be insightful and things that we can share internally, again, learn and grow from. We want to keep it short. I don't believe that these surveys should be any longer than 5. Gosh, if it's taking 10, maybe, but really want to keep them short. Again, time is currency, so I want to keep it simple. The last is being timely about this. I want to make sure that the survey is deployed within 24 hours of the subscription end date. So if you end today, the survey would go out tomorrow. And so sequencing that in such a way that, things are still fresh in their mind. I don't want this to be, a month later, well, they're already using another solution or they're doing something different. Now I'm asking for feedback, right? So being very timely about that is important. being genuine. I want everyone to know like why we're asking for the information, but then also sharing, what we change as a result of that. And so also, asking if it's okay if we share future communications about changes that we've made based on feedback, I think allows us to be very transparent, shows them that we're listening, that we care, and that we're taking the actions that we need to enhance all of that for them. And then expressing gratitude again, your customers are not required to complete the survey. In fact, maybe they're not even customers anymore. Keep your expectations low. Don't assume that 100% completion rate is what you should be striving for. But anyone who does take the time to complete this, you need to find a way to express gratitude and appreciation for their time. Like I said, sometimes just letting them know that they were heard, that's enough. Other times, maybe if you want to give them a gift card or something like that, definitely find a way to express that gratitude. Sometimes words are plenty. And so this is a big focus for us now. I want to be able to get this up, get this running so we can start to collect that feedback, because the more feedback I can collect over time, I think the better it'll make us all. So this is a big area of focus for us. I don't know that I'm going to do one or the other. I think I'm always going to keep the end user survey along with the exit interviews. But again, if you're an organization that doesn't have the bandwidth to go and run those exit interviews, doing an end user survey or some variation of the survey is fine as well. Like I said, for me, I like the conversation, so I'm going to continue to do the exit interviews, but that's what works in our model. That's what works for us. It doesn't work for everybody. So again, remember, it depends on what you've got access to, the people that you're working with. So just be very thoughtful about that as you're kind of building out your strategy. So that brings us to the end of today's session on our offboarding. So I will do what we always do and kick it over to Q&A. So I will stop sharing today. Very good. I wish Dave was here to ask me questions, but he's not. So I will say, if you haven't already, I'm going to go pull up the Q&A. Drop your questions in there. I will try to do my best to go ahead and look at the chat as well. All right. So Lacey, really curious who you'd recommend should conduct the interview from the team. Like I said, it depends. In some cases, I'll tell you the truth. When I was a CSM, I supported one of our company's largest customers. And I did that even as a VP because the customer said, if you take Kristi off of our account, we're leaving. And so I was definitely their trusted advisor. We had built and fostered a strong relationship. There was no one better suited to have that conversation with them than me. Like I said earlier, though, in some cases, maybe they want to give feedback on their customer success professionals' experience and the experience they had with them. So maybe to get more transparent feedback, it's somebody else in the organization. I've also seen a lot of folks actually hire a third party to come and do those interviews, right? So somebody who's completely agnostic of the partnership, who is just there to really listen and learn, creates a safer place, might ask different and better questions. So I would say that there is no right or wrong person. You've got to figure out what the best resource is for you internally. I will say having this same person, at least majority of the time, ask the questions. You start to hear things, learn things. You might start to lean in a bit differently, right? Ask better follow-up questions. You'll understand themes and patterns of things you've heard previously. So for me, at ClientSuccess, I like to run these. I know that Dave wants to get involved as well. So where it makes sense, maybe he'll do some, I'll do some, maybe we'll do some together. But like I said, it depends. You've got to figure out who the best suited resource is. Katie also asked, Katie Stewart, what is the value in waiting until after the deprovisioning? If they've confirmed they plan to cancel, would you want to wait for the interview? For me, it's my preference because I do want to manage the partnership all the way through. And so the idea of the exit interview being after it's over is almost like kind of like the final way that we're wrapping up, right? The final conclusion there, and allows me to engage at the very end. Also still collecting feedback on how we manage them through that deprovisioning and the end of the partnership and how we effectively offboarded them. So for me, there's a little bit of a sequencing and wanting to hear how that went as well. I've also found that customers sometimes are less defensive when they're no longer customers. And so there's almost like a sigh of release, right? There's no more pressure. There's no more expectations. It's a safe place. Like we're not doing business together anymore. I really just want to listen and learn. So sometimes even the date and the timing of that makes an impact on the feedback that you'll collect from those customers. But again, it depends. If you want to do it sooner, there's nobody that says you can't. For me, in the process that I've created, we do it right after the partnership's concluded, but we do try to schedule it while we are still in partnership. As part of our offboarding, we let the customer know, like, we want to do this interview. Here's the nature of it. Here's what we intend to do, what we're asking. And then we try to get that scheduled. And what we try to do is facilitate that between 1 and 5 days post-subscription. So hopefully that answers that question. Larissa, what do the client's responses on the, what do you do with the client's responses on the exit interview? Do you have an internal process to store them? Does the person that conducts the interview share their perspective on it with the rest of the team? How are these answers becoming actions you can take to improve processes and products? That is fantastic. You're right. I didn't talk a lot about disseminating that information. So my apologies. I only get 60 minutes for these things, guys. But Larissa, to answer your question, basically what we do is we're recording them. So we do ask first, the customer, is it okay if we record this? If they say yes, great, we have the recording. And then what we do is we have all those questions basically in a Google Doc where the questions are in one column and there's open boxes right next to it. And so whoever's conducting the interview, in many cases, like I said, I'm just typing in the feedback. And then what I do is I share that document with our leadership team and ask that they disseminate that with the appropriate folks in their organization. All of those documents, though, do live in a shared repository. So anyone in the company at any point can go through and read those responses. And then what we do is we try to find either thematic points or things that are worth noting that aren't so specific to any one customer. And we talk about those in our town hall meetings. So that will be, hey, here's feedback that we've collected from our customers so we can all just hear and learn when it's thematic. And so things that continue to pop up or things that we hear, we definitely want to share those more broadly. And that's the forum in which we choose. So we make everything available, the recordings, the documents, we get the leaders, obviously we talk about that in our leadership meeting, then they are asked to share that with their broader teams. And then obviously, like I said, big points, we also try to bring up in larger group settings. And that's what works for us. Find a process that works for you to share that information in a way that's gonna make it through all the right channels. Great question there. Natalie, what are your thoughts on engaging with the customer after they have left? Is there an appropriate time to check in to see if their new solution is fitting their needs? That's also a great question. So one thing I do as part of the offboarding and kind of the exit interview is I do ask, do we have your permission to follow up with you in a couple months just to check in? And I do ask for their permission. We do have a way to keep track of that. Also, I don't want to keep their information if they're not willing to hear from us again, right? When they're no longer a customer, if they're not in our database, we don't want to spam them. But typically what I will do is check in every 3-6 months. If everything is going well, that's great. I ask them if I can keep them on our list for future announcements and updates just to hear how we're doing, what we're doing, how we're progressing. So 3 and 6 is I try to have like a to-do and a task in my own tracker that allows me to go and follow up with those customers just to do a friendly check-in. So those are the cadences that I use, 3 months and then 6 months. And I usually find that that's appropriate for my customers. All right. And the last one that I'll answer with a couple minutes remaining, do you exit interview all churning customers if you can, regardless of size? That's also a great question. We didn't talk about are all customers that are churning created equal. It depends. I hate that is, I don't know if you guys saw this, but I got a lovely gift because I always say it depends. So somebody sent me a Yeti with it depends on it, which I very much appreciate, but it does depend, right? If you only have 2 customers that churn a month or a quarter, yes, speak with all of your customers. If you have a large volume of customers, which means you have a large volume of churn, you can have a large volume of churn and still have a good retention number if you've got a large amount of customers. So it's going to depend on what your bandwidth can support. So I definitely recommend speak with as many customers as you can. You learn as much from big customers as you will from small customers. And so I wouldn't say that size should be the determining factor of whether or not you speak to them. All customer feedback is important. It's going to be valuable. It's going to help you. And so, I wouldn't say, draw a line in the sand and only do this and only do that. Do as many as you can would be my feedback there. All right. So I think that those are all the questions that I had in the Q&A box. If anyone wants to drop anything else in, definitely go ahead. We got like a minute left. Otherwise, I just want to thank you all for your continued participation in these boot camps. Hopefully you're finding them valuable. We will be back same time, same place next Tuesday for our final part of this webinar series, and we'll be covering the Voice of the Customer program. I'm personally really excited about that one. This actually nice dovetail into that because feedback through all stages of the journey is part of that Voice of Customer. So please come back next week, join us, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, invite everybody. Again, if you weren't able to make it, please, the recording will be made available. Give us 48 hours. We're going to share all the stuff. I will send you guys the deck, my survey questions, some of the templates, playbooks, so you'll have all of that. And if you're not speaking with your customers as they leave, please go and do that. Go have one conversation, puts you on the path of having a better learning experience with your customers. So thank you guys again. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you back next week.